So look, I have my own planner and I say this one is like having a conversation with yourself. Like how you're gonna start the month, what is important, a quote for the month. So what is your vibe? And then through the days, you're gonna track your mood, your to-do list and something that you're grateful for. Gratitude is very important to me. And then you have a space so you can write whatever you like. And then at the end of it, you have how do you what would you proud of, what are you happy of, what do you need to improve. So it's like you self-coaching yourself like and all month long. So you can check that out and more at butterflydreams.co, and you get a 15% discount using coupon first purchase just as a thank you for your support. Thank you so much. Hope you enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome to Life with Francy Podcast, a place where you will find conversations about mental health, business, trauma, life in general. I want to create a safe place where we can be ourselves, talk about our stories, and feel love no matter the journey. Thank you so much for being here. Hope you enjoy this episode. Now, let's get the show started. Today's episode is thanks to Women in Podcasting Community, where you can find tools and resources for women in the podcasting world. And now she offers an award as well. So go check out her community because some exciting things are happening and you can nominate your own podcast to win the Woman in Podcasting Award. So check them out. Jennifer Hensel has created an amazing community. And on today's episode, I have the pleasure to talk to Elaine, who is a bionic llama. I got to know more about that. As a speaker, a podcaster, polymath, and Pollyanna. She's on a mission to end silence, stigma, and shame surrounding suicide loss, ideation, and mental health. I just can't wait to start a conversation with her. Welcome to the show. Tell us, what is life with you?
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you giving me this platform to further this mission because I think it's really important that we give voice to all those who sometimes are afraid to speak for themselves and sometimes are just too beat down to do it on their own. I guess I will start sort of where things started. And as a child, I never knew what it was because we didn't have words for that back then. I'll start off by saying I'm 68 years old, been on the planet for a while. As a child, an option for me, if something happened, something went wrong, whether I burnt my toast or I fell off my bike, or somebody in the family died. One of the options in my head was always, well, I could just end my life. And I never understood what that was or where it came from. I just knew that in the 60s, that's not something you said out loud. And early in the 70s, when I turned 16, I lost one of my dearest friends, Andrea, on New Year's Eve, and I lost her to suicide. It was horrific for so many reasons that I never understood back then. We asked why. We had no idea. Nobody saw this coming. Nobody understood why it happened. And I had tried to call her at 11 o'clock New Year's Eve from where I was babysitting. Realized just as the phone was about to ring that she was babysitting her 93 and 95-year-old aunt and uncle. And I thought, oh my God, if I wake them up, she's going to get in trouble. So I hung up the phone. That has haunted me for the rest of my life. What if I had let that phone call go through? Could I have helped her? Would she have told me what was about to happen? And we'll never have the answers to that. And I do know that now. But that's all that went through my head because having that ideation with no name tag, knowing that I always thought that I would just make an exit, this brought it into very sharp focus. understanding that my friend was gone. The other thing was that we were Catholic and she was Jewish. And in her religion, you need to be buried within 24 hours of your death. So there were none of the trappings that we were used to. I hadn't been to many funerals at 16, but I knew I'm Scottish and Irish. It's a it's kind of a party. People come together, all the family comes together, and you celebrate the life of the person that you've lost. Well, there was none of that. And it caused me to really question everything I was and everything that was around me. And for me, that meant I didn't want to feel anything. I turned to drugs, I turned to alcohol, I turned to anything I could get my hands on because I just didn't want to be with those feelings. I didn't want to be with that kind of mental pain. And the universe works in very weird ways. Life went on, although my parents took me home to Scotland about 2 months after Andrea died because they didn't know what else to do with me. They thought a change of scenery might be helpful. Well, it just meant I spent 6 weeks in Scotland with new friends and new alcohol and new drugs that I could party with. It didn't solve anything, it didn't change anything. 4 years go by. I got married very young, had a little girl. I had a second child who died the day she was born. And the very next year, I was pregnant again. It was late in March. And on the highway, directly in front of Andrea's grave, I was crushed between 3 cars. A policeman had stopped me because I didn't have any lights. I had been sent out in the middle of the night to pick up a friend of ours who had been picked up for drinking and driving. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that evening would end with me losing the almost 7-month pregnancy I had. I lost a big portion of my left leg from my calf all the way up my thigh, part of my femur, all on the inside aspect. I broke my legs in multiple places. My shoulder was dislocated. I fractured my skull. And as I lay 2 lanes over on that highway, I had felt the hood on my coat gently go up under my head. And whether people believe me or not, I believe Andrea helped me on that highway because my head should have split like a melon. It was minus 30 Fahrenheit. There were huge snowbanks. My car was in the right-hand lane. We couldn't even pull off the road. I just happened to know where I was because Andrea's grave was right next to the fence. Lying on that highway, it seemed forever. But this was the 70s. It was 1976. There were no cell phones.
Oh my God.
There was no way to get a hold of anybody. And the poor young man that had come around the curve in the highway and hit my car, he ran up to the nearest restaurant and banged on the doors to wake people up and call an ambulance. It took them almost half an hour to get there. It was just outside of town. And the policeman, the reason I was standing on the road is because the policeman didn't know how to use the booster cables. And so I had to get between the cars and show him. I'm barely 5'2". He was over 6 feet. When the lights hit the curve in the highway, he saw them and he dove into the snowbank and saved himself. I was right on the roadside. So when the cars separated, I went up through the air and came down 2 lanes over. This meant for the next 5 years, I was in and out of hospital, sometimes months on end for plastic surgery. I have no kneecaps. I have no cartilage in either leg. I had to have lots and lots of plastic surgery to cover the hole in my left leg. I come from a family with kind of a bent sense of humor. My father suggested I tell people that I was bit by a shark because it's a much better story than getting hit by cars. Anyway, that's just to give you sort of an idea of how we try to handle trauma, how we try to handle what goes on in life. And it doesn't always work. But I was already so far down the rabbit hole of not feeling that I was trying to maintain this cold, hard exterior. And I never ever had what I would call self confidence. If you ever asked, I just thought I was big blue eyes and long, long legs for such a short person. Well, now I was just big blue eyes. My legs were a total mess. I was covered in scars, and every year there were more scars because it was more surgery. After 5 years of not being able to ride horses or ski or skate or do any of that, I had put on a fair amount of weight. I was disgusted with me even more than usual. To be honest, I hated me, absolutely hated me. I ended my marriage. I couldn't deal with what had happened in the accident. It wasn't that my husband had a problem with it, it was definitely me. I became very prickly and very defensive and, well, I'm going to say nasty. I thought I was pretty nasty. I was in pain 24/7. And every year they just kept adding more and more pain meds because they didn't know what else to do with me. I remarried somehow in 1980. And in 1982, I was pregnant again. I spent most of the last 5 months of my pregnancy in the hospital. I was very high risk at this point. And we had a son. While I was in the hospital, I had learned of something called a vertical banded gastroplasty. That's a stomach stapling was what they called it back then. This was 1983. And I thought that was the answer because it didn't matter what I did. I couldn't lose the weight. And I just hated myself more and more. When I broached the subject with my family, they were all absolutely in shock. Like, no, you can't do this. No, no, no. But when you make up your mind that you think something is necessary or you want to do something or you believe you are something, the universe will give you that confirmation. And it doesn't matter whether it's something good or it's something bad. When you look for confirmation, you get it. So when my son was 3 months old, the whole family was out for brunch. And I had very seriously been looking at this surgery. I had gone to the washroom at the restaurant, and a lady came out of a stall behind me and looked at me in the mirror. And she said, "Oh my God, you're so beautiful. Why are you fat?" That for me was confirmation that everything I thought about me, how disgusting I was, how much I hated me, was right and true. And the only way to fix this was to have this surgery. So I went against the whole family. I got my gynecologist to book the surgery because there was only one doctor in our city that was doing this surgery. It was brand new, it was considered experimental. Unfortunately, what we didn't know, this doctor was already being investigated because he had a total cohort of 37 people, including me, and he'd already killed 2. He took me into the hospital in September. The first surgery happened, and they didn't say very much to me after. I knew that I would be feeding through a tube in my side for 3 weeks, and I knew that I could have nothing by mouth. Okay, no water, no nothing. It all went through the tube because all the work they had done in the stomach would have to heal. Now, I went against my whole family to do this. So there is no way I would have jeopardized this. I had been in the hospital so much after my accident. I thought I was, I don't know, making a sacrifice for the family. And when they let me go home, I went home with nothing for pain. I don't know how I thought that would help the family, but in my mind, that was my, I don't know, my penance, if you
Mhm.
will, for doing something they didn't want. Unfortunately, I had a fever when I left the hospital, and they couldn't figure out why. I also had this weird pain in my shoulder blade. And I had mentioned it to the student nurse that worked with me every day. But they let me go home anyway with the promise that I would come back next week for a special swallow so that they could check how things were how things were managing. And that was all fine. I was only home for 17 hours. At the end, my husband had to call the hospital, call the emergency to say that I was in so much pain. I couldn't sit, I couldn't stand, I couldn't lie down. And the only way that they could do something was to give me something that could go into this tube in my side. So we went to the emergency that evening, and the doctor that dealt with me realized that this was no joke. I was in a great deal of pain. And he gave me a shot, and he gave my husband a prescription that he could take and get filled in the morning so that we could crush up the pills and put them in my tube. Just after he gave me the shot, he told me I could get dressed to go home. And at that moment, the, I guess, the oldest resident that had been in the surgery came walking through the emergency room. And he saw my husband, he saw me, and my husband said the look that was on his face terrified my husband because he didn't know what was wrong, but he knew something was terribly wrong. The rest is a blur. The doctor came back in the room and said, "No, sorry, don't get dressed. We have to check something." I don't think he really knew what was going on either because they hadn't said very much. But they called the head of X-ray, and the next thing I know, there were rounds of testing and swallows, and within 5 hours, I was in surgery again. We don't actually know what he did in the first surgery or the second because he falsified the reports. There were 2 for the first surgery and 3 for the second. They all had different information, so we're not sure really what happened. When I came to, they didn't know where to put me because they felt they had to watch me. So they put me in a cancer ward. I was in a room with 3 other people, and within that week, all 3 of them died. I was 27 years old. I had no idea that this was as close to death as I was ever going to get, more so even than the accident. On the 3rd day that week, I developed an abscess on my left lung, and they had to put in a chest tube with a machine. The next day, I went septic and I developed peritonitis. And the next day, they told me that I would have to have more surgery.
Mm.
I said no. I was done. I just couldn't go through anymore. And the head of the X-ray department said, "You don't have a choice. If we don't operate, you're going to be dead before supper." I refused to sign any papers, and they ended up getting my husband and my father to sign. It was my daughter's birthday, and I didn't want to go through with this for her. I didn't want it to ruin her birthday. But my parents took her out for her dinner while my husband waited at the hospital. And unfortunately, I guess I think the first thing that happened was my heart stopped. And in trying to restart my heart, the doctor, because he was being investigated, we guess, he decided he was going to take it all apart. So in total, I had a vertical banded gastroplasty for 20 days. He took it all apart. And when he was finished, I guess it was such a mess that all the skin and all the tissue was what they call friable. I could be a medical student now,
Yeah.
but that tissue was, they couldn't put me back together. They couldn't sew me up. They had to pack me. And in the packing, I stopped breathing. They broke a couple of my ribs, got me breathing again. And the doctor called in another surgeon. And this one, I still shake my head. I don't understand. He asked him to divert my esophagus out my neck.
Oh.
So he cut a hole here and stitched my esophagus on the outside of my neck. So when I came to in ICU, I had tubes coming out of me everywhere. This hole in my neck, sorry to be gross, but the saliva was dripping on my skin. And I found out the hard way, saliva is kind of like battery acid. It just was blistering my skin, and every day it just, all of this came to a head when they got me back to a room. They called in what they call a stoma therapist, the people that do colostomies.
Mm-hmm.
And she showed me how to wear this colostomy bag on my neck. I spent the next few years going through a lot of odd stuff because I fed through a tube in my side for 13 months. And after that, down the road, I came to wonder what there's got to be more to life than this. This is crazy. Like, this can't be life, can't just be bad stuff. I have two beautiful children, a great husband, a wonderful family. There's got to be more. And I started reading books and learning all I could about things that were much more esoteric. And I found a spiritual advisor who taught me to meditate and visualize. And after 2004, I really got on the road to very deep spirituality and began to take control of my life. And now I get to do what I want to do. I get to work with all kinds of fascinating people on the internet. I am an SEO and social media foundations specialist, and I've been doing things online for more than 20 years.
Mm.
I absolutely love what I do and the people I get to work with. And all of it, I think, is made more sweet by the fact that I died twice. I've gone through absolute hell and back. So I understand that every single moment is a gift. And I have such gratitude for everything that I have now. It's absolutely wonderful. And here I am at 68, giving back with a podcast that deals with suicide loss and ideation and mental health, and really taking the time to be supportive of others and use the empathy that I have found and the feelings that I now feel almost every day.
I love that. And let me tell you, girl, you look like you're still in your 50s.
Oh my God, I love you. Oh, that is the kindest gift
Oh
anyone could
my
give.
goodness. How did the podcast come about?
I was LinkedIn invited me to on a tour of their Toronto office. And when I went down that morning, I had a new phone and I needed a phone case. So I stopped in a store in Toronto and they had this beautiful case that was all blingy. And anybody who knows me knows I like my bling. And I said, who made this? It was by Kate Spade. I hadn't really bought anything of hers. She was a little too preppy for me. I thought, oh, that's interesting. Well, that night going home on the train, I heard that she'd taken her own life.
Hmm.
And by the end of the week, so had Anthony Bourdain. And Andrea was in my ear saying, it's time. You need to step up and do something. And thus the podcast started as Keep Breathing. And then it became Suicide Zen Forgiveness, because that's really what it's all about. And guests share their stories of suicide loss, ideation, mental health, and trauma so that we can offer hope to others and they can lighten their own burdens.
Thank you. Your mission is very important. And that's why I have the podcast, to have
Yeah.
stories like yours in hopes to show others the way, and tools and resources. Because in that season, the most that we need is tools and resources because we don't see anything else. So thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story with us and your wisdom. Where can my listeners find you?
You can find me. I'm Elaine Lindsay. I'm the Bionic Grandma, and my company is Trool Social. That's TROOL Social. And I'm pretty easy to find. You can look at the corner of search and social in Google search, and you'll find me there.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for listening to another episode. Oh, no, I forgot one more question.
All right.
What are you grateful for?
Oh my God. I am grateful for so much. I'm grateful that every morning I wake up and I'm still breathing. I'm
Mhm.
grateful that when I get out of bed, it takes a few minutes, but I can walk. And that's amazing. I'm grateful for 5 grandchildren, 2 wonderful kids, my husband of 44 years,
Wow.
and my father, who is 91 and has dementia. He got dementia when he was 90. So we are very blessed and very grateful to still have him in our lives. Oh, and my chihuahuas.
No, of course. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Life with Francy Podcast. You can find my show in all major podcast platforms as well as my YouTube channel. You know how it goes. Like, subscribe, and share to help others, find the message. You will find the links for my guests and more in the description of the episode. Hope you have a blessed day. Bye bye.